The Monster of the Mangones, Colombia's Vampire Killer. In the 1960s, as Colombia struggled with social upheaval and rapid urbanization, the city of Cali became the hunting ground for one of South America's most enigmatic and terrifying serial killers. Between 1963 and the early 1970s, an unidentified predator stalked the streets of Colombia's third-largest city, claiming the lives of between 30 and 38 young boys. His victims were found in urban alleys known locally as Mangones, undeveloped lots that dotted the expanding cityscape. This is the story of the Monster of the Mangones, a case that would terrorize a generation and inspire Colombia's first horror film, while remaining one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in the country's history. To understand the emergence of the Monster of the Mangones, we must first examine the Colombia of the 1960s. The country was undergoing rapid social and economic transformation, with massive rural-to-urban migration creating sprawling shantytowns around major cities. Cali, in particular, was experiencing explosive growth as the center of Colombia's sugar industry and an emerging hub for commerce with the Pacific coast. This period of rapid expansion created perfect conditions for a predator to operate. The city's growing pains resulted in numerous undeveloped lots scattered throughout neighborhoods, areas that would become known as Mangones. These isolated spaces, often filled with construction debris and overgrown vegetation, provided secluded locations where crimes could be committed unobserved. Street children and impoverished youth were particularly vulnerable during this era. Many young boys roamed the streets unsupervised, working as newspaper vendors, shoe shiners, or simply surviving on their own. Their disappearances often went unnoticed initially, creating opportunities for a systematic killer to operate with relative impunity. The first documented murder attributed to the Monster of the Mangones occurred on November 5, 1963, when the body of a paperboy was discovered in western Cali. The discovery would mark the beginning of a reign of terror that would haunt the city for years to come. The killer's modus operandi was both distinctive and horrifying. His method consisted of inserting needles into the heart and thorax of his victims, accompanied by sexual assault, rape, and torture. Most disturbing of all, it is believed that he used syringes to draw blood from his victims, leading to speculation that the perpetrator suffered from a rare psychological condition known as Renfield's syndrome, a compulsive need to consume blood. The killer was described by experts as a true sexual sadist who appeared to derive pleasure not just from the act of murder, but from the prolonged suffering of his victims. The systematic nature of the blood extraction suggested either medical knowledge or a deeply ingrained pathological ritual. Following the November murder, more cases of murdered young boys began appearing throughout Cali. The bodies were consistently discarded in Mangones, the urban alleys and vacant lots that gave the killer his eventual nickname. On December 4, 1963, another boy was found on grassland in the northern area of the city, in what is considered the second recorded homicide. 8 days later, a third body was discovered on the shores of the Aguacatal River. This victim presented particularly disturbing evidence of the killer's sadistic nature. The body was found lacking eyeballs, suggesting post-mortem mutilation. 2 more bodies were discovered before the end of 1963, one near the railway station and another in Prados del Norte. By the end of 1963, 5 murders had been recorded between November and December, all similar in their brutality and methodology. The victims were primarily pre-adolescent and teenage boys, most between the ages of 8 and 13. They were typically street children or young people who frequented the Mangones areas where there were unbuilt spaces and isolated buildings. In January 1964, Cali police found the mummified body of another boy. 2 days later, the remains of 12-year-old Alberto Garzón were discovered. Another 3 corpses were found in the same month, scattered across different sectors of the city. The systematic nature of these discoveries led investigators to realize they were dealing with a serial killer. Between February and April 1964, there were an additional 3 murders. One very close to Tequendama, another in Puerto Malarino, and the last at a potrero, an open field used for grazing. The geographic spread of the crimes suggested that the killer was highly mobile and familiar with various neighborhoods throughout Cali. Faced with this unprecedented wave of murders, the authorities initially struggled to comprehend the scope of the crimes. In a misguided attempt to calm public fears, officials sent a series of notices to the public claiming that the bodies were likely taken from cemeteries and later scattered around Cali, mostly in solitary areas. This explanation was both inadequate and insulting to the victims' families. The physical evidence clearly indicated that these were fresh murders, not grave robberies. Despite official denials, much of the press and public demanded that the killings be properly investigated and the terror finally brought to an end. During the height of the panic in 1964, citizens of Cali lived in fear and uncertainty as children and adolescents continued disappearing from the area. Parents began restricting their children's movements, and the Mangones areas became places to avoid at all costs. As the murders continued without resolution, various theories emerged about the identity and motivation of the killer. The most persistent legend involved a wealthy man who allegedly suffered from leukemia and maintained a dying, cadaverous appearance. According to this theory, the man had hired accomplices to kill young people so he could survive on their blood, either through transfusions or by drinking it directly. This vampire-like narrative captured the public imagination and added an element of gothic horror to an already terrifying situation. The idea that the killer might be a member of Cali's elite, protected by wealth and social position, reflected deeper anxieties about class inequality and justice in Colombian society. The blood extraction method used by the killer lent credence to theories about vampirism or medical experimentation. Some speculated that the perpetrator had medical training, while others believed he was simply a sadist with an obsession for blood. The systematic nature of the extractions suggested careful planning rather than impulsive violence. The investigation faced numerous obstacles that would prove insurmountable. The victims were primarily from marginalized communities, street children and poor youth whose disappearances were not always immediately reported. This delayed response gave the killer time to dispose of evidence and plan his next attack. The scattered crime scenes across different neighborhoods of Cali also complicated the investigation. In the 1960s, police departments lacked the sophisticated communication and coordination systems that might have helped identify patterns more quickly. Each crime was often investigated in isolation rather than as part of a larger series. The Mangones themselves presented forensic challenges. These undeveloped lots were typically unsecured and frequently disturbed by construction activity, scavenging, and other activities that could contaminate crime scenes. Physical evidence was often compromised before investigators could properly examine it. After the intense period of murders in 1963 and early 1964, the crime ceased for several months. This sudden halt led some to hope that the killer had died, been imprisoned for other crimes, or simply left the area. However, more cases were reported again in late 1964, dashing hopes that the nightmare had ended. The temporary cessation of murders remains one of the mysteries of the case. Serial killers typically continue their activities until they are caught, die, or become incapacitated. The deliberate pause in the monster's activities suggests either extraordinary self-control or some external factor that temporarily prevented him from killing. When the murders resumed, they followed the same pattern as before: young boys found in Mangones, bearing evidence of sexual assault, torture, and blood extraction. The consistency of the methodology confirmed that the same killer was responsible for both the earlier and later murders. All of these events are believed to have claimed the lives of between 30 and 38 young boys and men over approximately a decade. The exact number remains uncertain due to incomplete record-keeping and the possibility that some bodies were never found. At the time, it was the most notorious criminal case in Colombia's history. The perpetrator was never captured, identified, or brought to justice. He was eventually nicknamed the Monster of the Mangones by the press and public, a moniker that captured both the geographic pattern of his crimes and the monstrous nature of his acts. For some, the monster became a simple myth or legend, while others remained convinced that he actually existed. The unsolved nature of the case has led to decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. Some researchers have drawn comparisons between the monster of the Mangones and later Colombian serial killers like Luis Garavito, known as La Bestia or the Beast, who confessed to murdering hundreds of children in the 1990s. The terror experienced by Cali residents during the 1960s became part of the city's collective memory, passed down through generations as both a cautionary tale and a source of ongoing fascination. For many residents who lived through this period, the monster represented not just an individual criminal, but a symbol of the broader social problems plaguing Colombian society. The fact that the killer preyed on the most vulnerable members of society, poor children with no protection, highlighted systemic inequalities that persist to this day. The case also influenced how Colombian society views serial crime and child protection. The failures of the investigation became a touchstone for discussions about police competence, social justice, and the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable populations. The case led to the creation of a film titled Pura Sangre, Pure Blood, by director Luis Ospina in 1982. The film represented a significant moment in Colombian cinema, being considered the country's first horror film and one of the founding works of the Caliwood movement, a group of filmmakers centered in Cali who sought to capture the reality of Colombian life. Ospina's film took the basic elements of the monster legend and transformed them into a story about a wealthy sugar magnate who requires constant blood transfusions from children to survive a rare disease. The story tells about a man who needs fresh blood from children and teenagers, as he suffered from a peculiar disease that gave him a monstrous appearance. The film was shot primarily in Cali, with one scene in New York City costing 16 million Colombian pesos. It premiered at the Cartagena Film Festival, where it was hailed as the first Colombian horror film with international quality. The movie won 2 awards, Best Actress for Florina Lemaitre and Best Musical Score for Phil Pearl. Luis Ospina and his collaborator Carlos Mayolo both grew up in Cali during the monster's killing spree and were personally affected by the terror that gripped their city. In interviews, they described how the disappearances and murders of young boys haunted their generation, creating lasting trauma that influenced their artistic work. Pura Sangre also touches on issues related to vampirism and class inequality, as it portrays an individual who needs to ingest blood in order to survive. The film serves as both a horror story and a social commentary on how the wealthy can exploit the poor, even to the point of literally consuming their lives. The movie's depiction of a rich, powerful man who remains above suspicion while orchestrating the murders of poor children reflected widespread suspicions that the real monster might have been protected by wealth and social status. This theme resonated with audiences who had lived through the original crimes. In the decades since the monster's crimes, criminal psychologists and law enforcement experts have attempted to analyze the case using modern investigative techniques and psychological profiling methods that were unavailable in the 1960s. The fact that the killer was able to operate for years without detection suggests either exceptional cunning or some form of protection that allowed him to avoid suspicion. His apparent familiarity with various neighborhoods throughout Cali indicates he was likely a local resident rather than an outsider. Some researchers have attempted to connect the monster of the Mangones case to later serial killers who operated in Colombia, particularly those who targeted children. Luis Garavito, who confessed to murdering over 400 children in the 1990s, has been cited as a possible comparison point for understanding the monster's psychology. However, significant differences exist between the cases. Garavito's crimes were characterized by extreme mobility across multiple countries and a focus on rural areas, while the monster of the Mangones operated primarily within the urban environment of Cali. The blood extraction element also appears to be unique to the monster's methodology. The geographic concentration of the monster's crimes within Cali suggests a different type of killer, one who was deeply rooted in the local community and possibly maintaining a normal facade while committing horrific acts. This profile is consistent with many organized serial killers who manage to avoid detection by appearing to be ordinary members of society. More than 6 decades after the first murder, the case of the monster of the Mangones remains officially unsolved. The killer's identity, motivation, and ultimate fate are still unknown. Whether he died, was imprisoned for other crimes, or simply stopped killing remains a matter of speculation. The case raises disturbing questions about how many other crimes may have gone undetected during this period. If the monster was able to operate for years while killing dozens of children, how many other predators might have been active during Colombia's turbulent mid-20th century period? The blood extraction methodology that characterized the monster's crimes remains particularly puzzling. Was this behavior driven by a genuine psychological compulsion to consume blood, or was it part of a deliberate attempt to terrorize the community? The monster of the Mangones case highlighted the vulnerability of street children and impoverished youth in Colombian society. The fact that so many victims could disappear with minimal initial investigation exposed serious gaps in child protection systems. The case became a catalyst for discussions about the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable children, particularly those from marginalized communities. It demonstrated how social inequality could literally become a matter of life and death for the most defenseless members of society. The geographic pattern of the crimes, victims found in Mangones throughout the city, also highlighted urban planning issues that created dangerous spaces where crimes could be committed unobserved. This led to greater awareness of how urban design can either facilitate or prevent criminal activity. For some observers, the monster of the Mangones has transcended the boundaries between true crime and urban legend. The combination of horrific real crimes, unsolved mysteries, and gothic elements like vampirism has created a story that continues to fascinate and terrify generations of Colombians. The persistence of the legend reflects broader anxieties about justice, protection, and the presence of evil in society. The fact that the monster was never caught or identified means that he could theoretically still be alive, though he would be quite elderly if he began killing as a young adult in the 1960s. The case has become part of Cali's identity, referenced in academic studies, artistic works, and popular culture. It serves as a reminder of a dark period in the city's history while also highlighting ongoing concerns about crime, justice, and social inequality. The monster of the Mangones case offers important lessons for modern law enforcement dealing with serial crimes. The failures of the 1960s investigation, lack of coordination, delayed reporting of missing children, inadequate crime scene preservation serve as cautionary examples for contemporary investigators. The case demonstrates the importance of taking missing children reports seriously, regardless of the victim's social status. The initial dismissive attitude toward the disappearances of street children allowed the monster to continue killing for years without significant pressure from law enforcement. Modern criminal profiling techniques might have been able to develop a more accurate picture of the monster's characteristics and likely background. The systematic nature of his crimes and his apparent local knowledge could have provided valuable clues for investigators with appropriate training and resources. When compared to other unsolved serial killer cases worldwide, the monster of the Mangones shares certain characteristics with organized killers who successfully evaded capture. Like Jack the Ripper in London or the Zodiac Killer in California, the monster appeared to possess enough intelligence and local knowledge to avoid detection. However, the monster's case is distinguished by its particular focus on children and the unique blood extraction methodology. These elements suggest a killer with specific psychological compulsions that went beyond simple sexual sadism or thrill-seeking behavior. The Colombian context of the crimes, a rapidly urbanizing society with limited law enforcement resources, provided conditions that may not have existed in more developed countries during the same period. This environmental factor likely contributed to the monster's ability to operate without detection. The unsolved nature of the monster of the Mangones case continues to influence how Colombian society approaches issues of child protection and criminal justice. The knowledge that such horrific crimes could go unpunished has contributed to a general skepticism about institutional competence and fairness. The case has also become a touchstone for discussions about class inequality in Colombia. The fact that the victims were primarily poor children, while rumors persisted about a wealthy perpetrator, reflects broader patterns of injustice that continue to characterize Colombian society. For criminologists and law enforcement professionals in Colombia, the monster case serves as a reminder of the importance of developing sophisticated investigative capabilities and maintaining vigilance against serial predators who target vulnerable populations. Today, Cali has grown into a major metropolitan area with over 2 million residents. The Mangones, where the monster once disposed of his victims, have largely been developed, replaced by buildings, parks, and legitimate commercial activities. Yet the memory of those dark years in the 1960s persists in the collective consciousness of the city. The case of the monster of the Mangones remains one of Colombia's most notorious unsolved crimes, a reminder that some mysteries may never be solved and some justice may never be served. The 30 to 38 young victims of this unknown killer represent not just individual tragedies, but a collective failure to protect society's most vulnerable members. As we remember the victims of the monster of the Mangones, we must also remember the lessons their deaths taught about the importance of vigilance, the need for competent investigation, and the responsibility of all citizens to protect children from those who would harm them. The boys who died at the hands of the monster of the Mangones were children who deserved protection, love, and the chance to grow up safely. Their deaths served as a tragic wake-up call about the vulnerabilities that exist in any society and the devastating consequences when institutions fail to fulfill their protective responsibilities. While the monster's identity may never be known, the impact of his crimes continues to resonate through Colombian society, influencing art, culture, and ongoing efforts to protect children from predators. The case stands as both a historical tragedy and a contemporary warning about the eternal need for vigilance against those who prey upon the innocent. In the end, the monster of the Mangones represents more than just an individual criminal. He embodies the capacity for evil that can flourish when society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. As we remember his victims, we commit ourselves to ensuring that such failures never occur again, and that the monsters among us never again find such easy prey. In the forgotten lots of a growing city, between blood-soaked myths and institutional silence, a predator thrived. The monster of the Mangones didn't just steal childhoods, he exposed a city's blind spot, a nation's neglect, and the tragic truth that monsters often go unpunished when their victims are poor, voiceless, and unseen. If this story shook you, if it reminded you that evil often hides in plain sight, and that the most vulnerable are too often ignored, please like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. We tell these stories not to glorify the killer, but to honor the lost. Their names may be forgotten in police files, but not here. Not with us. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the most terrifying monsters aren't legends, they're the ones no one ever caught.